Hello, this is Kaylia in 2020. What you are about to hear is the remastered version of the episode that you clicked on. Why? Well, it turns out that when I started this podcast, I got some incorrect information regarding copyright law and fair use policy. After nearly 2 years of making content, this oversight was brought to my attention. There was mild panic, lots of guilt, and then a few fervent nights doing research. It seems we might exist in this gray, nebulous area of fair use for critique and commentary, and thus our use of a teeny tiny bit of the music from the soundtracks of the movies that we are critiquing and commenting on might be allowable. But then again, it might not. So a few things. 1, I don't want to be a jerk, even accidentally. 2, I think it's important to acknowledge when you mess up. But 3, and this is key, I think acknowledging your mess up isn't enough. You have to rectify the situation if possible. And guess what? It's totally possible to go back into these old episodes and clip out the maybe illegal, maybe just slightly crappy bit of audio and replace it with a bit of music created just for me by the same composer and performer who made us our theme music, which is what I'm going to do. And since I can't help but tinker just a smidge, I might clean up a teeny tiny bit of audio noise while I'm in there. I mean, I've learned a lot over the last 2 years, and who knows, you might be stumbling upon this podcast feed years from now. So why should your present-day ears be punished because way back in time, I hadn't yet found the noise reduction button? Anyway, without further ado, here is the podcast you came here for, just slightly better. Thanks for listening.
It's the Pages of Popcorn's podcast. Jennifer and Kaylia will edify. It's the Pages of Popcorn's podcast. Jennifer and Kaylia are gonna talk, so you'd better damn well listen.
Hello, and welcome to the Pages and Popcorn podcast, the podcast where we, Jennifer and
Kaylia,
2 book nerds, talk about movies based on books as well as the original source material.
Today we will be discussing The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, which was a short story by James Thurber published in 1939, as well as the 2013 film adaptation, which starred Ben Stiller.
But first, we are going to tell you about all the ways you can connect with us on the internet.
As you know, we have a webpage where you can find sources, references, and updates about the show.
You can also connect to us via our Facebook page and our Twitter, both searchable by typing Pages and Popcorn Podcast into your search bar. We now have polls about our episodes on Facebook and Twitter land, so check them out and make your opinions known.
And of course, you can email us directly at pagesandpopcornpodcast@gmail.com.
We also want to thank all our patrons for their continued support and remind you all that our Patreon page is www.patreon.com/pagesandpopcornpodcast. And you are welcome to support us and this podcast for as little as $1 a month. That tiny little bit of support really helps us out. And for your $1 a month, you will have early access to all the podcasts the second they are ready. So head over to our Patreon page and sign up. Again, it's patreon.com/pagesandpopcornpodcast.
And we want to really encourage you to rate and review us on whatever platform that you listen to us on, especially iTunes, because that will help other people find us. And now, on with the show.
You didn't know about this at all until I put it into our...
Yeah, the title didn't resonate, and then... Actually, when I read the short story, I went, oh yeah, I've read this story. I read this in school. I didn't remember his name, but I remember the short story. And then when I was looking for the movie and I saw the still of Ben Stiller, I was like, oh, I think I saw the preview for that at some point and was like, oh yeah, that looks worth watching. But I didn't actually see it in the theater or at all, so it was kind of vaguely in my consciousness, and so then I rented it on Amazon Prime and watched it. So
cool. Yeah, that's where I remember first meeting this short story. Was in school. It was in grade school, and it's one of those that I remembered. There was just something about it that caught my attention. So, yeah. Okay, so... It's a very short story. It's available on the New Yorker website. It was written by James Thurber in, March 18th, 1939 is when it was published. It's still available. And it's so short, I could probably read you the book instead of doing a summary, but I'm still going to do a summary. All right, so we start with a daring Navy pilot flying his seaplane flying boat through a storm. He is commanding and confident, and he shepherds his crew through the ice and wind. Very dramatic and full of excitement. But then he's going too fast. What? Oh, daydream, and Walter Mitty is driving his wife through Waterbury, Connecticut. He's going 40 miles an hour, which is just too fast. In real life, Walter Mitty is a henpecked, mild-mannered man out for a weekly shopping trip. The story moves in and out of Walter Mitty's fantasies, each linked by something going on around him. After he drops off his wife at the beauty parlor, he rebelliously takes off his gloves, as his wife told him to wear, then resentfully puts the gloves back on and hurries along when a police officer barks at him. The most Mitty can do to reassert his manhood is rev the car a bit and kick some snow slush, which reminds him he needs overshoes, as his wife told him. As he passes a hospital, he becomes a world-renowned surgeon, putting on the surgical gloves. Mitty heroically saves a millionaire banker with the use of a fountain pen and a lot of made-up technical argle-bargle because he's brilliant and in charge. Oh no, a parking attendant shouts he's in the wrong lane. Back to the real world. Everyone is more confident and capable than him, even the parking lot attendant. He hates these shopping trips because he never gets anything right and can't remember what he was supposed to get. And as he shouts out about a trial, there's a phrase, perhaps this will refresh your memory. And on his mind wanders again. This time he's a deadly assassin in a courtroom. He's in control. Deadly. Has beautiful women swoon into his arms randomly. Puppy biscuits. That's what he was trying to remember to buy. Puppy biscuits. Shopping done, he waits for his wife in the lobby, picks up a newspaper with an article about Germany and World War II, and now he's an ace pilot, a man who can pilot two-manned planes single-handedly because he's awesome sauce and off on a secret suicide mission. The bravery. His wife smacks him on the shoulder. I've been looking for you. And she tells him off. He has an exchange, tells her he was just thinking. It's a little reminiscent of that Twilight episode of the man who only wanted to read and nobody would let him. Just thinking. He's waiting outside at the drugstore for her, smoking a cigarette in the rain, facing a firing squad. Stoic, proud, and disdainful, he's inscrutable to the last. Yep, and that's the end of the short story. So all the stuff that was in the story, the only thing that's the same in the movie is that there's a character named Walter Mitty, and he has fantasies. That's it. So, the movie starts in a gray, sterile room. A buttoned-up Walter Mitty is looking over some finances when he takes a break to gaze at an online dating site. The woman he's interested in, Cheryl Melhoff, is witty into adventurous men, has a three-legged dog and a son, and Mitty needs to psych himself up into making first contact, but technology fails. Lots of product placement for eHarmony. And later on, there's Papa John's, and the product placement in this movie was fairly obvious. Mitty has to admit to the eHarmony support guy that he hasn't done anything mentionable in his profile because he's done nothing mentionable in his life. When he parkours off the Chicago L and into a burning building to save a three-legged dog, during which time he has made a prosthesis for the canine and gives it to a grateful Cheryl who happens to be standing by. Oh wait, no, he missed his train. Next day, his geeky sister tells him he's got some family dramas to deal with, and Mitty finds out Life, the magazine he works for, will close down and go to a digital-only presence. Mitty works in the photo archives, a dull and repetitive job, but is dying out in the digital age. When he is bullied by a manager, all the great comebacks happen only in his mind. I have been there. I feel ya. He creeps a little bit on his love interest by staring at her oddly and having adventurous fantasies. During these frequent fantasies, he's lost to the world. In the basement, he has a little conversation about Sean O'Connell, who is a photographer and works with Mitty, and sent Mitty his latest negatives in a wallet as a thank you. The two have a really interesting working relationship, but have never really met. Alas, negative number 25 is missing, and that is supposed to be on the last episode, the last issue of Life magazine. There's some development both in character and romance with Cheryl as she tries to help Mitty put together the mystery of the negatives, and later he's able to figure out O'Connell is in Greenland. There's some backstory with nerd crazy sister and Mitty's mom. Mitty, as a child, skateboarded, dreamed of adventures, but had to give up his life goals when his father died, leaving his dreams to be only experienced as dreams. Even when Mitty breaks out the rare moment of cool, teaching Cheryl's son some skateboarding tricks, it goes unnoticed. But Mitty's not down yet. In a fit of carpe diem, Mitty goes to Greenland, Greenland is quaint if small and filled with eccentrics who drink beer out of glass boots. Mitty almost gets an eye cut out by a broken bottle in a bar fight, but instead makes friends with the violent helicopter pilot who is singing karaoke. Helicopter pilot offers to fly Mitty to the boat in O'Connell's picture. Cue Kristen Wiig singing Space Oddity, the dream inspiring Mitty to race to the helicopter and leap in. And the whole time he's there, I can't believe he's not putting on a seatbelt. It drove me nuts. He has to dive into the ocean to get to the boat and has a moment with a shark, loses the package the helicopter pilot was supposed to deliver. Turns out O'Connell left a half day earlier, but they can't contact him because the radio parts are in the ocean. Mitty makes friends with the crew and follows clues to find O'Connell, who will be in Iceland. In Iceland, he has to outrace Chileans for the one bicycle. Just a note, the Chileans were going to a strip club. Iceland outlawed strip clubs in 2010. Mitty's fantasies cause him to crash, so he trades for a skateboard using his Stretch Armstrong that his sister gave him. Ripping his tie apart to make some hand guards, Mitty does the ultimate in cool skateboarding down a mountain road. The volcano erupts. Mitty just sees O'Connell on a biplane to take amazing photos as a random, very nice Icelander drives Mitty back to the town to rescue him. At Papa John's, Mitty's accounts are getting low, so he calls Cheryl to get some info. She asks, "They have Papa John's there?" In truth, Iceland didn't have at the time of the film. Power product placement. Back home, Mitty is still dogged by evil manager bullies, is fired, and chickens out when he goes to Cheryl's house. The fantasies that were gradually receding are coming back, going from inspirational back to escapism. At his mom's house, Mitty finds out O'Connell came to visit, but missed O'Connell, and now the photographer is in Afghanistan, so Mitty is on the road. He crosses the Himalayas with rented guides, befriends warlords, and traverses the wilds. The mundane returns with the eHarmony tech on the phone while Mitty is in a random mountain. He finds O'Connell waiting patiently to photograph a snow leopard. Turns out the missing photo was in the wallet that O'Connell gave him at the beginning of the film. Romantic comedy misunderstanding. Profound lesson about living in the moment, and the two descend the mountain to play football. Back in the States, Mitty is stopped by security and needs the eHarmony support tech to vouch that Mitty is an American. There's a bit of a bromance. Mitty gets the final negative, goes back to Life magazine, confronts the soulless corporate bully. Now Mitty has an incredible resume, gets a date with the girl, and is on the front of Life magazine's last issue.
It is fascinating to me how two people can watch the same movie and take notes and do a recap, and your recap is so different than my recap would have been.
Really?
Yes.
Okay, so what do you highlight as the plot?
Well, I mean, basic plot points, but you didn't say anything about the fact that he had thrown the wallet away, or like what the inscription in the wallet was. The fact that when he went to the house, the way you phrased it about not doing anything at the house, but like that was an actual plot point. That was the romantic misunderstanding. The stuff with Cheryl, I would have talked differently about, and yeah, I think it's interesting, like what we would have pulled out. Like my notes are very, very different, but I think that will come through in our discussion, it sounds like.
That's kind of the point of having two people discuss this.
For sure.
Because we do have two very different views of the world.
Yes.
So this is one of my first questions for you is Cheryl. So it's kind of a romantic comedy, but not really. It's much more about Mitty. And it galls me to see a woman used as a trophy, but how would you have proper romantic development when you have such little face time?
Cheryl was a prop. All the women in this movie were a prop, which is disappointing, except that the story that it's based on, the only woman in that story is not a prop. She's a horrible shrew who is awful. Like she's not, she's awful, right? And in this, but I think before we can really talk about like the difference in the females or the women, we have to kind of talk about the whole point. They're different points. So The short story was written as part of like this humorist thing where we're going to laugh at the little man, the person, the guy who's small and unassuming and isn't very capable. And there was this whole big thing about making fun of those men. So it's satirical and it's funny. We're supposed to feel bad for Mitty in this short story, but we're also supposed to kind of mock him. He's there for our amusement. And the trope of the overbearing, domineering wife was common in the writings of this author. Okay. The movie decided to not make that the point. We have our everyman, and he is rather small and unassuming, but not only does he have a history of being more interesting and engaging, he has a tragic backstory, which, again, you didn't mention in your recap, which I found really important. But he had been this adventurous spirit with his mohawk and the skateboarding, and his father was very supportive, and then his dad died, and he had to start working and take care of his sister, who's this out-of-work actress, and his mother. So he became this very responsible, button-up person, and he kind of simmered down and punched down all of his excitement.
I did mention that.
All of his excitement aspects. And then his story really wasn't about becoming somebody different, but it was about reconnecting with himself and finding himself. And it's a little on the nose where you take this wild around the world journey to find the thing that you technically already had. Not only was the negative in the wallet that he had, but his adventurous spirit was always in him all along. So the movie was telling a very different story, just starting kind of from the same part. So it's almost not fair to compare the women in the short story to the women over here. But if we look at them separately, I would say it is disappointing that...
Yeah, I wasn't even trying to compare the two because there's nothing that's similar. The only thing that's really similar is Walter Mitty having some fantasies. That's it.
Right. So the women in the movie are basically just props.
But everyone besides Mitty is a prop. His boss is a prop. The eHarmony guy is a prop. The photographer is a prop.
Right, but we were talking about the women.
Okay, but I don't know. It's like the women are props. Yeah, but everybody's a prop.
Okay, well, I'm sorry. I thought you were wanting me to... If you still had... Go ahead.
No, well, that
you
was
asked a question. I'm trying to answer it, and you're stomping all over my answer before I even finish saying my answer.
Sorry. Okay, go ahead, please.
Well, ask your question again, because maybe I misunderstood your question.
Okay, so my thing about Kristen Wiig is whenever you have this romantic comedy, because they take out that he's in a relationship, they make it into sort of there's going to be a romance, and she's treated as a trophy, which instantly makes me dislike this film a little bit.
See, I didn't see her as a trophy. I saw her as a prop, and very unrealistic in a lot of ways. One glaring example for me is when they're in the park and they're having this conversation, and then she's like, "I gotta go. My kid is literally skateboarding into the street." But then she stops to have this heart-to-heart with him to give him some moments of inspiration. And I'm like, no, if you're a mom and your kid is literally in the street with a skateboard or even getting close, you're not going to turn your back on him and have this heart-to-heart. It's very much about Mitty, for Mitty, blah, blah, blah. Okay, those are the failings. However, it redeems itself a little bit by not making it be all about just her. And it takes a long time to get there. I will say, like, one of his fantasies is that he sees her face, the birds make her face in the sky, like this sign from God or something. And that's ridiculous. But also, like, she's his motivating force. She's the plot point that pushes him. She sings a song. He jumps on the helicopter, all of this stuff. But then ultimately, he gives up on her. He leaves the skateboard for her son, and he leaves. And then he continues his journey kind of without the need of her. So I feel like it redeems itself for that because he's not searching her out and still trying to get the girl. That's no longer his motivation. So I see that as kind of an evolution. Like when you're young, maybe the teenager aspect, it is all about maybe the hormonal lust, but you get older and there's other things that motivate you and propel you on your epic journey. So I liked that. I liked at the end that they were kind of together. They were like holding hands. So, okay. And we had that romantic thing of, oh, my ex-husband's not really here. He was just there, but we're not back together. Okay, fine. Whatever. At least it didn't end on a big epic kiss and, stuff like that. And so, but I have other feelings about the ending in itself. I actually really enjoyed this movie, until probably the last couple of minutes. But that's how I feel. I feel like she was just there as a prop, not as a trophy, so to speak. So that's good springboard onto something else about this film, because I like this film more than I expected to. And looking on Rotten Tomatoes, the critics score gave it 51. Like, the critics
just hated on this film.
People really didn't like this film. And I read a bunch of reviews and they were like, oh, it's insipid. Oh, it's this. Oh, it's that. And it could have been funny, but it wasn't. And Ben Stiller, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, okay, this is like one of the only Ben Stiller movies I've actually enjoyed. So maybe this is a Ben Stiller movie for people who don't like Ben Stiller. I thought it was great. I have to tell you. Like, I read the short story and I was like, yeah, okay, I remember this. And God, it was it's a little depressing, so let's see what the movie's like. And I watched the movie and I was like, God damn, this movie's beautiful. This movie is beautiful.
The cinematography is really amazing.
And there's stuff with like the signages and like the colors and like he's all this gray and then there's like sparks of colors and the colors take a transformational journey and the signs take a transformational journey.
Yeah,
and oh my God. And then the locations are gorgeous. Okay, and then you have the story, which is so much more uplifting and optimistic than the short story, which I like. I like happy things.
So a note about the cinematography is if you look at the film in its beginning, it's very linear. Everything's boxed, everything's lines. And like you said, it's grays and blues. It's not necessarily depressing. It's just very neutral and blank. So when the eHarmony guy said, when I first met you, you were just a blank page. In a way, Mitty isn't. That's just how he's perceived, which is in keeping with the short story. That is how he's perceived, but there's the secret life.
Right. Well, and also, not only is there a secret life, but it's foreshadowed because yes, he goes to work, right? That's one of the first things that happens. And he's walking into the office and the building is all black and white and everybody is wearing black. Everybody is wearing black except for Mitty. He's actually wearing a lighter colored jacket. So yes, he looks just like all the other automatons and it's all very stark and basic and boring, but already at that point, he's a little bit different. And so and at first I was like, okay, did they dress him like this so we could tell him apart and all the people? Obviously, no, they make choices, right? So he's already standing out a little bit. And I just thought that was really interesting. And it heralds up. At the end, the very last shot, Mitty's wearing all black. But now his face has more color in it because he's gotten sunburned and he's been windblown and he's done all these things. And so he's got this cute little hipster necklace going on. He's moved on. He's it's not about the color anymore. His confidence is there. But I thought the use of color in this movie is
it starts off
phenomenal.
Very great. And then when he goes to Iceland, he's wearing red. He takes the red car.
It's
the red pill.
It's the red pill. Yeah. To explain, he goes to Iceland and he's looking for a car and he says, do you have any cars? And the guy goes, yep, we've got two, a red one and a blue one. And then Mitty says, I'll take the red one, which as we know from the Matrix and et cetera, you take the red pill, you continue the journey. You're choosing passion and life and different as well as opposed to the mundane. The blue, Mitty's tie was blue. Their office was shot in these blue tones. So yeah,
and Iceland is gorgeous.
And it gets more vibrant as he goes on. Yeah, the color was amazing.
So just as a back note about the film, I made that little comment, Iceland, I mean Greenland. So he's supposed to be in Greenland, and there's one thing I did really like about the film is that it was much tighter writing than I expected. So they'll make a comment, it's not a throwaway comment. Early on, somebody said, there's only 8 people in Greenland. He only sees 8 people the entire time he's in Greenland, which was technically shot in Iceland.
Right, which, I will say, there are more than 8 people in Greenland, and that kind of painting with such a broad brush and assuming things about other countries even and making them kind of a butt of a joke isn't great. I will also point out that one of his early fantasies is that he's a mountain guy and he shows up to talk to Cheryl and he's just climbed this mountain and he's all covered in snow and whatever. And for some reason now he has this accent and it's super racist. Of course, that fantasy gives us the poetry falcon, which I frickin' love. I want a poetry falcon. Who wouldn't want a poetry falcon? But there are a few problematic racist things that happen. And yes, the joke about there only being 8 people in Iceland is a joke, but I just want to be culturally aware that there's obviously more than 8 people in
Noted. I still thought it was funny that they make a throwaway joke, and then there's a certain amount of subtlety in the film. So unless you're actually counting the people, would you notice that he only sees 8 people there? If you notice, all of his fantasies, they're foreshadowing something that he does. He jumps off the train, and then he jumps off the helicopter. He's on the Conan O'Brien show, and then he's on the Lifetime cover. Each of his fantasies actually foreshadows an actual thing he does.
Most of them, I would say. It kind of falls apart a little bit when he makes one of his fantasies is a statue. One of his fantasies is her face in birds. So, okay. but a lot of them do. They definitely, they foreshadow and they give us hints about himself. So what I wrote down, because his fantasies are so important, and I thought it really breaks up the whole thing. So in the book, in the short story, we have 5 fantasies, which is a lot considering how short the story is. So we have the first one is the commander in the hydroplane, man in charge, and who's brave. Then we have the famous doctor who also fixes this piece of medical equipment with a fountain pen. So again, we have man in charge, and we have brains over bronze. Then we have he's an expert marksman, and he's cool under pressure. Again, man in charge, cool under pressure, very competent, typical, very skilled, highly competent. Then he is a pilot. He's brave. He can hold his liquor. It's very important. He's a soldier. Okay, these like quintessential manly things. And then the last one is that he's a prisoner, but he's got dignity. He's going to die with dignity. He's going to face the firing squad. He's, rawr. Okay, awesome. So the fantasies in the movies, we had a lot more, but actually not a zillion more, which I thought was interesting. So there are more because it's a movie, it's longer, but okay, so the first one we have is that he jumps off of a train thing. He dives into a burning building that's about to explode. It's not burning yet. But he knows because the dog is barking, which put a pin in dog barking because that happens a lot. So he dives in, he saves the dog from the building, and he fashions a prosthetic leg for the dog at the same time. So he is, a man of action, a hero with brains. And then our next one is that he's the mountain climber man this is the one with the racist accent and with his poetry falcon. He's rugged, but he's sensitive. Okay. So already in 2 ways, we're undermining that toxic masculinity, and we're saying that you can be masculine with other stuff, which I like, okay? Then his next fantasy is that he has made a statue, which is just purely artistic expression. It happens super fast. So that's it. Then we have this elevator fight where he challenges the boss.
It felt like Peter Griffin fighting the chicken mixed with Spider-Man Part 2 and The Matrix. That was one of the few cringe moments I had, was that whole fight scene.
To me, it felt like a video game, and it was very highly stylistic. They were basically skiing on asphalt and things are flying and the colors got very saturated, which is just pure testosterone, macho man on man action happening right here. Then his next one is a very romantic fantasy where she's talking to him in the park and then suddenly she's like, let's run away together. You're all I want. And then it transitions into this Benjamin Button thing where he's she goes, nestle up next to me and die as they're sitting on this porch.
That was also kind of creepy.
It was creepy and weird. But again, this fantasy is about being important to somebody, being the center of somebody else's universe, and with this romantic overtone. Again, not the highly masculine, macho masculine. It's a little bit different, okay? Basically in this fantasy, I'm gonna die after living a long, happy life with the woman that I love. Come on. Okay. Then we had the next fantasy is when Sean O'Connell, thank you, beckons to him with his fingers. And even though in my notes I wrote fingering fantasy, that's not actually what it is. Anyways, so O'Connell's beckoning him with his finger, and this is where we get into this fantasy is all about being chosen. And this fantasy goes into it's almost the same one. He's leaving Life magazine. He's running past the posters.
This is when we go from escapism to inspiration.
And as he's running past the posters, the last one is him as an astronaut, which again is the chosen, but now accomplished with a happy ending, because that astronaut picture's after the fact. You write about a successful, so it's again a happy ending is part of this fantasy. Our next fantasy is Cheryl singing to him in the middle of nowhere at this bar. And this to me was... I love
that scene.
This to me was more of the escapism becoming inspiration, because her song continues to play in his head as part of the fantasy, but in reality, he does really run out and jump into the helicopter. So at that point is when we really have the melding of the two. And to me, this is a very clear moment, because after that, first of all, jumping into a helicopter is not a fantasy. It actually happens. That's a real moment that he can be proud of. And then what happens after that is he jumps out of the helicopter. He misses the boat. He gets the wrong side of the helicopter, which is hilarious. He lands in the water, and then he freaking fights a shark. Okay, rather silly, But in the realm of the movie, it actually happens. It's not a fantasy. And he comes out of it, he's like touching the guy's face. He's like, did that really happen? Because sometimes he can't even tell. But at this point now, his real life is becoming more exciting. And it happens in that moment of that song that she does. So then the next real fantasy thing he has is Cheryl's face in the birds. And again, I feel like that's like the sign from God, again, about being chosen on his epic quest. And then our last fantasy is a bad fantasy. It's about Conan interviewing him and kind of like talking about the scandal. This is when he's really feeling down because he went to see Cheryl and he thinks she's with her back with her ex-husband. And he doesn't want the fantasy. He asks the cab driver, can you turn it off? And the cab driver says no. And he's sad. At this point, the fantasies are not escapism anymore. They're representations of his mind, but it's sad.
Well, he also just got fired, so he's had a couple of blows.
Yeah.
He missed the photographer, he got fired, and he missed the girl.
And now his fantasies are not building him up as this escape. It's just reinforcing what he already thinks about himself. This is the kind of quote-unquote fantasy daydream that I think we all have more regularly than the big epic things sometimes. It's just like that everybody notices us and everybody's looking at our bad things and everybody won't leave us alone about our sadness and whatever. And that's basically it. That's the last fantasy. And so if you chart the fantasies like getting more and more extreme and then kind of quieting down and becoming more based in reality, but also sadder. And then that's it. That's the end of him. And is he going to have more daydreams? God, I hope so. But not maybe to the exclusion of other stuff, which is my next point, but I want to make sure that you have a chance to talk too. So I have another point about the fantasies, but did you want to say anything else about the fantasies?
Just that I really love that space oddity scene. To me, that was one of those highlights of the film. If I was going to point to the film and say this is the key moment that I really like, because I love David Bowie and he was the center of the universe. And when he died, you could see the collapse of our world. That's the thing.
Views expressed in Pages and Podcast are Jennifer's own. The one's expressed by her anyway. Okay, so yes, it was a good song and.
All right, it was magic.
It was. I love that scene. I don't think I have quite the hero worship for David Bowie that you do, but I definitely agree with you that the Major Tom song, or Space Oddity as it's officially known, is well placed there and beautiful.
Some of the fantasies are a little cringy to me. Benjamin Button one was just weird. So it didn't flow as well. There are some jokes that fall flat, but overall, it was an interesting progression that is very, very, very different from the short story.
Yes.
Yeah, and so I wonder, and this kind of goes to how do you see the short story? Is it optimistic? Is it pessimistic? It's such a weird thing to take this short story and make this movie, where it almost feels like you're taking Walter Mitty as he wanted to be and giving him almost the fan fiction ending you wish he had.
Yeah, it's very much more optimistic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I am curious about your next point.
Okay, so again, this doesn't happen in the short story because the short story is so short and it's not the point of the short story. But one of the themes in the movie is about, what you're looking for, you already had, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it did a really great job of doing this. He's on this epic journey. It turns out when he blacks out or zones out or daydreams out, he's actually missing very important things that are happening in the real world. And those things, if he hadn't missed, would have made his life better. So there's a couple obvious examples. When he's talking to Cheryl in the park, he zones out thinking about her expressing her undying love for him. And she's actually trying to make this connection with him that he misses out on because he's skipping ahead to the ending of the story. At one point, and this happens off screen, but his mother references it, she's telling him about Sean O'Connell and like where he is and going on and da-da-da-da-da. And he had zoned out, so he missed it. So part of his whole epic journey didn't even need to happen, because if he had just been listening to his mother and not zoning out, then he would have known more information. There was another one too that I wrote down.
So I'm going to make a quick note while you look for that about the product placement, because that is very frustrating to see. At the same time, I can defend a little bit of that in this film because it's not really promoting these things. eHarmony, he didn't get the connection through that. And at the end, he was like, it's $500 a month. I can't afford it. It's not really a promotion. Papa John's is very sad. This is the thing that he became when he had to give up his dreams. So it's product placement, but it's also not promotional, if that makes sense.
Product placement does not bother me in the slightest in any way, shape, or form. I understand that people got to make money. And also, our world is full of products. I'm literally holding a phone right now that is an Apple phone, and it has 2 Dutch Bros stickers on it. So if you made a movie about my life and you didn't put the Dutch Bros stickers on my phone because you were, you know what I mean? Like, it's not, is it product placement because you put them on the phone in the version of my movie life? But yeah, but also it's realistic. You know, we have product placement all over the place.
Well, it depends on how garish it is. And so this film, it's like really in your face. And so at that point, it's like, okay, is it product placement or is it really plot? And it's much more plot than product.
Yeah, it didn't feel garish to me. There had to be some internet dating site. And if they made up a fake one, we all would have been like, oh, fake internet dating site. Like,
well, it's whenever you hear a phone number and there's the 555 area.
Right. It's whatever. Fine. So, yeah. And Papa John's, it tied into the story because, you know, oh, did that make you sad because you just lost your father? And then you went for work for a place that was called Papa John's. And he said, God, I didn't even think about it. Right. I mean, okay, the product placement did not bother me at all.
And again, this is Jennifer's opinion. I'm kind of glad that Papa John's was not a happy memory. I am not a fan of the CEO, so that worked great for me.
Well, and what I did think was interesting too, you talk about product placement, Sean's camera is covered up. The Nikon thing is covered up, which is very, again, true to real life because photojournalists cover up the brand names of their cameras because they don't want them to get stolen and they don't want to get sucked into conversations about which brand is better than what. Yep. So yes, there was, but there could have been so much more. Also, it's about Life magazine. So like it had
that worked in great with
it
the
was
theme.
Perfect, right? So
and that he works on negatives.
Yeah, he's the negative aspect, coordinator or whatever. Yeah. So for sure. And we all know about art with the negative space. It tells you more about the piece of art than the actual subject in the middle of the painting. Like that's what you learn when you're doing charcoal and whatever is about use of negative space. And so it's all about the contrast, and that's freaking Walter Mitty right there. He's all about the contrast of what's left hidden and versus what's being shown. It's perfect. I have no problem with any of that stuff.
And that's what I was saying. The writing is actually much tighter than I would expect from a film like this. There aren't throwaway lines. There aren't throwaway characters. They all kind of come back to something.
Right. And really, I think that the movie's making a point that no life is small. Like being a parent, being a friend, being a good person, those are worthwhile things. Mm-hmm. Having a job. You don't have to travel the world to be worthwhile. Even though, Walter does, but Cheryl doesn't, and she's not seen as an unworthwhile character because she hasn't traveled. She is worthwhile. And
she's charming. She's witty.
Right. Yeah. What we get from her is that she's compassionate. She's got the 3-legged dog. She feels bad for Mitty when he's getting picked on by the bullies guys. She's the one who says, hey, he misunderstood the song. The song's about a cool guy. Like even when nobody's watching, she feels bad for him. She's aware of him. So she's compassionate and she's worthwhile. And I liked that. So, yeah, I thought that the movie made some really good points. But I'm going to throw a question to you that you often ask me, and it is, do you believe that a hero is made or born that way? And how would you put Walter Mitty into the hero camp?
I see him as somebody who was that and had to discover it for himself.
Yeah.
Because he was the skateboarder. He had these dreams, he had these goals, and he gave them up for a very specific, noble reason. He had to take care of his family. They didn't have any savings. Their father died. And so that, in its own way, is very heroic. Tragic, but heroic. Mm-hmm. And so this is something I actually really liked about the film, and you highlighted it when you went over his fantasies, is this idea of toxic masculinity. So the original Mitty, he is always dreaming about being competent and courageous and inscrutable, and he's a tough guy. And this Mitty is sensitive and artistic. So this is one of the arguments I have with people about feminism isn't anti-men. It's actually very much promoting equality. And men have a very hard time expressing emotions and finding emotional outlets. And so they often rely on their wives or their girlfriends, which puts a lot of stress on their relationships. This is part of feminism, of saying these traits, we shouldn't just say that they're feminine traits. They're not negative traits, and they don't make you weak. So that is an important part of feminism, is promoting men's emotional health.
Yeah, and supporting it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of what Cheryl does.
Yeah, I loved it. La la. I know I'm giving away my ending, but yeah.
Yeah, I like the film better than I expected.
Yeah, and I just wanted to point out the things that were not fantasies: the skateboard ability, the shark fight, the bar fight, helicopter jumping. Also Todd. And I will tell you, as I watched this movie, I was
super ready for Todd to be a figment of Mitty's imagination until he actually showed up and had Todd. I could very easily have seen this movie doing that, where like the person on the phone, because that's also motivating him, right? Oh, you haven't done anything? Oh my God. Like kind of like talking about, but also like that magic ass cell phone reception. Like I kind of was like, okay, this cannot be real. Todd cannot be real. He's obviously talking to his subconscious, which is trying to pull him out of, this place that he's in and get him back on track and blah, blah, blah.
I actually kind of like that. It was this introduction of the mundane while he's on this fantastic adventure.
No, it totally works. And it was great. And I love Patton Oswalt. So yes, hooray for actually getting to see him. But I was also ready for this to be in his head. And I would have liked it just as well if it had just been in his brain and not been a real person.
Speaking of product placement, Patrick Oswalt is very much Cinnabon. He's a warm, gooey little Cinnabon full of sugar and sweetness and happiness.
Yes, unless you make him mad on Twitter, then watch out, world! Love you, Patton Oswalt. Okay, so yeah, Todd, not a fantasy. Can I say something that I didn't like about the movie?
Sure.
No, okay. And it's not a real failing of the movie, but I feel like it would be remiss to not point it out. And that is the privilege, Mitty's privilege. He's this white dude with enough money to do all of this. So he doesn't have any of his family ties because he does have his mom and his sisters he's taking care of, but he's kind of taking care of them and they're adults. It's not like he's got young children. It's not like he's got a partner, that he's financially responsible to and for. And he doesn't have the safety concerns. He freaking goes to Afghanistan. He goes to the Himalayas. If this had been a woman's going on this trip, there would have had to been some kind of discussion about the safety aspect of traveling all around the world, like on your own and by yourself. Mitty does not have those concerns, like, at all. He makes friends with the warlords and he's playing, soccer up there in the mountains. And I want to acknowledge that this white, privileged money guy, and yeah, money is a concern, but he's not desperate. It's definitely...
Well, at the end, he does look at his checkbook, and it's down to $72.
Yeah, he had to begin with, and, I think that's part of what privilege is it gives you a lot of stuff. What you do with it is up to you. But he was definitely given a lot of, he's educated. Let's just not, he is educated. He had a job. Yes, he got fired, but you know what I mean? It's not like he was not going to be able to find another job. And there was a severance package involved. I just want to point out that, and to springboard off of that this is almost like the wet dream of white middle-aged men who are like, God, I guess I didn't do anything with my life. If only I could, which it makes sense. And we should all have those dreams and go out and do the things. Although I do think that the movie's telling us that you don't necessarily have to travel the world to find meaning and stuff, which is a good message for those guys maybe going through middle age. And
so this very much breaks with the short story too, because, and this is why I wonder, is the movie, should it be called Walter Mitty? It doesn't have anything to do with the short story except for the title character and that he has fantasies. That's pretty much the only thing that really ties them. And Walter Mitty in the story it's a question of, do you see that story as pessimistic or optimistic? It does have these dark undertones, but it is a guy who's just this guy who's middle-aged, who doesn't have that much that's going to happen in his life at this point. He's not going to be the ace pilot. None of this is going to happen. So it is sort of sad, and that ending with this firing squad. But at the same time, do you see these fantasies as him triumphing over the world because he won't let his interior self be defined by the outside world?
Do you?
This is when I don't have like a hardcore, this is how I feel about it. I can see the pessimist side. I see the story Mitty as ultimately someone who's heroic, because I do believe in, I believe in the Willy Wonka fantasy. We are the dreamers. I am on the dreamer side for the most part. So for me, I feel like the world is the firing squad, and he's going to be inscrutable. He's going to be his self in his mind, even if that is isolating.
I don't think that this short story was optimistic or pessimistic. Again, I kind of get stuck on the fact that it was part of this whole subgenre of things that were poking fun at these people. And that really bothers me. I personally don't find it funny. I understand that it was a response to World War I, but to me, it just really smacks of toxic masculinity, where we're going to, as a society, mock, disparage, and look down on the men who aren't the big soldiers, who are struggling and sad and are trapped in being harangued by the domineering wife. No, I don't find it funny. And I find it incredibly sad. Yes, it's nice that he has this fantasy life that he gets to, escape into, and that's great.
Well, do you think we're supposed to mock Mitty along with everybody else in the story, or are we kind of rooting for him?
Well, I think I, as an audience member, definitely root for him, and I know that a lot of people did root for him, but it was written as a humor thing. Like that whole little man thing was part of this funny thing, and so like I feel like you have humor that punches up and humor that punches down, and I'm not really sure where this goes, but it definitely doesn't feel like it's punching up. So I'm not a fan of punching down,
I feel like Thurber has some feeling for this guy. I think he's having some playful fun with it, but we are rooting for Mitty, and Thurber is writing the story in a way that we do root for him, because he is nagged, he is henpecked, and he's kind of stuck in his world. So what do you do? What do you do with that?
Yeah. No, and I see that. I'm just saying that, like, societally at that time...
So, just a quick note about the author, James Thurber, because he's an interesting guy. Thurber described his mother as a born comedian and one of the finest comic talents I think I have ever known. She was a practical joker, and on one occasion to pretend to be crippled and attend a faith healer revival, only to jump up and proclaim herself healed. His father was employed as a clerk and a minor politician and dreamed of being a lawyer or an actor, which is an interesting dichotomy. When Thurber was 7, his siblings and he were playing William Tell, and he was shot in the eye with an arrow, and that left him almost blind. And after that, there's something called Charles Bonnet syndrome, where he would have very vivid imaginations. So just as a character, as a real life person, he's sort of an interesting sort of character. His first marriage was an absolute failure. And this is sort of the sad part of his life, that a lot of his comics and his female characters tend to be these domineering people. And it's unfortunately very similar to probably what his life was like. And I don't want to impinge too much on that. It's also a product of the times. But I find him as a person sort of fascinating. And as somebody who has these imaginings, I think he is, in his own way, very supportive of Mitty.
So you see it kind of as an optimistic story, then?
I do.
Okay.
And there's also the question, is it a story about fantasies that has reality sort of interspersed because it bookends on fantasies? Or is this the story of Walter Mitty, who's just this dreamer?
And again, I think that they took the idea of that and then they decided to do something different with the movie. So to go back to your thing about whether or not this movie should even be called Walter Mitty, maybe, maybe not, but it definitely...
It shares some elements. It's so incredibly different.
Yes, in all the best ways. Something else that happens in the movie that I think is worth mentioning is that Sean, our photographer, says, beautiful things don't ask for attention. And I feel, okay, first of all, let me say that again. The photographer, Sean, says, beautiful things don't ask for attention. And I really feel like he's missing the second part of that quote, which is beautiful things don't ask for attention. They simply receive it. But he doesn't say the second part. So it's left as if it's this profound thing, like beautiful things don't ask for attention. But that's not that's not the whole thing. And you literally are a photographer taking pictures of beautiful things. And I get that there's like this message about like live in the moment. And, it was before this, but your life doesn't have to be an Instagram life. Like it's okay to just like live in the moment and make those memories. But I will say 2 things about that. One is that this is really close to the trope of the artist characters looking down on the people who actually enjoy their art because the artists themselves have like transcended normalcy and they're better than all of that. And a little bit of ableism because some people don't make memories the same way that other people do. And if you don't take pictures, you don't have those memories. So like living in the moment and then having that little special memory to carry on with you forever does not work for a pretty decent sized segment of the population nowadays. And maybe that's a medical thing we can or cannot get into, but some people need the pictures and they don't, that's how they create and keep their memories.
I would have never thought of.
Yeah. Especially people who have ADD, people who have sensory issues, people who have low vision might need memories to be captured in order to make them.
My mother's having memory issues. And so that's one of those things. Let's take a picture so you can look back. Well, put the details
Also,
on it.
people who've gone through trauma as children don't make memories the same way that other people do. And so it's a thing. So I kind of bump on it a little bit, but for both of those things. The artist, like the literal artist sitting there with his camera going, well, you don't need to take pictures of things. Okay, but that's like literally how you're paying for your globe-trotting lifestyle is by selling the pictures you take of things. So, I don't know.
The only part that really got me about that is I wonder if any photographers were watching this film, if they just had a brain aneurysm when he didn't take the picture. Because they sit there for, maybe 3 weeks waiting for the damn thing to show up to take the picture of the thing.
Oh no, but he's transcended. Now he has the memory of it. So that's more important. And I just think, what about all the people who don't get to go up there and will never see a snow leopard? Like, I'm really glad that people take pictures of things,
This, to me, strikes as looking down on the next generation. And I see that with people who are like, the whatever generation it is. There's always, the young generation doesn't get it. They just want to eat avocado toast. And it doesn't take that long to take a picture. If you take a picture of your food, it's not like you're not going to enjoy the food. It takes a second. You're not missing out on your life when you take a picture of a thing. Mm-hmm. If you're just holding the picture, if you're just holding the camera, and you're not experiencing the world, that's the criticism. But it's a very unfair criticism.
Right. Yeah, no, I think so. And we all know people who live their lives on Instagram, and that's not maybe their true life, but they put it through filters, so to speak, the filtered life. But I think that's a different issue. And
there's like the Paul Logan thing, where he becomes the persona instead of being himself. So he maybe have started off his channel as being Paul Logan, and then he has to be the character. It's the Flanderization of Paul Logan, and that's where you sort of get in trouble when you make yourself part of the art.
Mm-hmm. But again, I don't even think that this movie was trying to make any of those points.
No,
I feel like
not.
this guy was just basically like saying, "Oh, live in the moment," without kind of unpacking all the ways that like living in the moment is a little. It doesn't age well. I'll just say.
Well, it's also it's a great thematic thing of you have a photographer and they're supposed to be capturing these moments in time, which is its own sort of interesting philosophical thing if you want to get into it, of what does it mean to capture a moment in time, to have it frozen there.
Right. Well, and then we've talked before about how like things change under observation, right? And I mean, not to get too into this, but Sean's a little bit of a weirdo, psycho stalker, because like his pictures, okay, he's got the picture of the thumb from the pilot, fine. The pictures of the water, sure. Then he's got the picture of part of this piano because he was in Mitty's house. Now, he and Walter Mitty had never actually had a conversation. They didn't have like a relationship, but he literally went to Walter's mom's house to talk to her about Walter. And then the picture that he once used on the cover of Time is a picture taken, a candid picture taken of Walter as Walter's sitting outside like on his lunch break looking at negatives. And you're like, so he's like hiding behind a bush, like taking a picture of Walter Mitty and then being like, this is life. Because this is life that I stalkery found. And I don't know. There's a little, and again, I'm going to pull gender into it, but if I was a woman and somebody was like, this is the quintessential picture, I took it of you from behind a plant, I would be like, fuck you! Like, not okay! And you visited my mom? Like, what the hell? But like, oh no, it's okay because of the bromance issue, or just because like, it's just, he's an artist and that's okay. And
it is a great last picture. It's the story around the last picture that you go, oh okay. But it is a great last picture.
Well, and then Mitty didn't even look at it. It's a picture of him. He didn't even look at it, so he's surprised when it's, but okay, just so y'all know, if they put your picture on a cover of a magazine, you have to like sign paperwork, right? Even in 2013, like this, yeah, okay. He would have had to give permission for his picture to be there. So
there are tons of magical moments in this.
Fine.
I mean,
also
really, fighting a shark.
Can I just say, I really wish we hadn't seen the last picture. -25. I would have been fine with not seeing it because I think that the quintessential life moment is such a big thing to put on any one image. Like there's no image that's really, and it's fine. It works and it tells this cute little story and stuff and it wraps up very nicely because he literally was the thing he went to search for. I get it. Bonk, bonk on the head. But there is a part of me that would have been like, it would have been cool if like the last thing had been, they were like, oh, we should see what the picture is. And they walk over and like the camera's behind the magazine and they just lean in and you see like kind of like the top of the cover, the top of the magazine from the point of view of behind it. And the two of them looking at it and they both go, wow. Credits, roll credits. Like, I would have liked that. We would have not had the hand-holding romantic thing. We would have been like, what was it? We don't know, because really the quintessential life moment is going to be different for all of us.
But the thing is, if this had become a popular film, this would be one of those things of, what do you do with the 3 shells? What was on the package with the wings? What was in the briefcase? It's one of those movie things that gets debated endlessly. Well, what was the last shot? So I'm happy seeing the last shot. I thought that was because it was a lot about Sean's relationship with Mitty.
Relationship.
It was a bromance with a romantic misunderstanding. Tell me that was not
star-crossed lovers who never talk until the top of a mountaintop. Yeah, no, I get it, and you're right. And I enjoyed it too, and it's fine. But there was a little part of me that would have been super happy if Todd had not been real and if we had not seen the shot. I would have been like, damn, my mind would have been... I'm very happy with this movie. I really enjoyed this movie. I liked a lot of it. But it didn't blow my mind. And those two things would have been kind of like, damn. It would have just stayed with me, I think, a little bit. But that is fine. Whatever. They made artistic choices.
They made artistic choices and actual characters and a character. No, I'm fine with that. But, like, he's got cell phone a working cell phone on an Afghanistan mountain in the middle of nowhere.
Yep. Sure. Here's a fun thing. So Ted, who I can't not see as Ben Wyatt or as the demon from The Good Place, and he's just so good. That Adam Scott, who's so great. Anyways, he's got this very manly beard, but it's very professional manly beard. No, but it's
manicured.
It's yes, definitely. There's a lot of manscaping happening on Ted's face. So that's Ted, and Walter Mitty obviously is all clean shaven, and then at the end, Walter has grown his own man facial hair, because he's got his testosterone all ramped and ready to go.
Scruffy.
Oh yeah,
because
that's
rugged.
A real man. Because scruffiness, as opposed to the clean, polished. Fake.
Well, speaking of fake, like when he's playing soccer, he looked very yellow. I was like, did they paint their faces? It was almost that level of yellow where it looked like they put paint on. When he's tan, he's the orange tan.
Yeah.
It says, like, okay, movie, you have a better budget than this.
So there were some weird spray tan moments.
Yeah.
I'd give you that. Okay, let's see here if I had anything else. Oh, just so that we all have it recorded for history, life's motto: to see things thousands of miles away, things hidden behind walls and within rooms, things dangerous to come to draw closer, to see and be amazed. That was life's motto. And I thought that was great.
So in the credits of the film, they do think there's a line where they thank all the people that were working in the film. So they have the credits, but they also have like a little line about that.
So here's our trivia. Life magazine, American magazine, published weekly until 1972, as an intermittent special until 1978, and as a monthly from 1978 to 2000. During its golden age from 1936 to 1972, Life was a wide-ranging weekly general interest magazine known for the quality of its photography. Possibly the best-known photograph published in the magazine was the photograph of a nurse and a sailor's arms taken on August 14th, 1945, as they celebrated victory over Japan Day in New York City. There's controversy about that picture. I will link to it because it's not relevant to this discussion, but it is well worth noting. The cover of the final issue of Life's magazine's original weekly run featured the titles This Year in Pictures 1972 and Special Double Issue. The words appeared in white against a black background containing a random listing of words in red, including the Olympics, Godfather, peace, and assorted typefaces. But the final issue of the magazine was dated December 29, 1972, and contained articles about Nixon's visit to China, the war in Vietnam, and dissident Russian author Alexander Solzhenitsyn, along with a farewell message to readers. While the positioning of these words looks random, the word chosen for the lower right side corner was simply and poignantly goodbye. Let's see here. Time Inc. resurrected the magazine as a monthly publication between 1978 and May 2000 and featured premature baby Jason Michael Waldman Jr. under the title Born Too Soon on the final cover. But The last printed issue was the supplement, published in April 20th, in 2007. The cover story, 21 Places You've Got to See to Believe America's Hidden Treasures, featured a photo of John F. Kennedy statue in President's Park in South Dakota. So, just in case you, like me, were like, what was Life's final picture? There were technically 3 different final covers, and now you know.
How high do you hold a film to accuracy? I pointed out a couple things. Iceland doesn't have strip clubs. They don't have Papa John's, at least at the time of this film. Is it important to the plot that there are Chileans needing a strip club, and so he had to race for the bike? Or was that just... Yeah.
I mean, I kind of wish they could have said something else, but yeah, sure. There was like, and then he's like, "You're gold, pony boy," which is, I guess, a reference to something that was a little deep dive. I looked it up. I don't care now.
Yeah, it's from a book.
Yeah. So, but whether or not things are incredibly perfectly accurate is not really neither here nor there. The movie was freaking magic. And that's what it was.
Yeah, so it got 70 plus rating on Rotten Tomatoes from viewers. It got 51 from critics. And so I'm wondering if it's one of those films that critics see so many films, they get very jaded. Even the review on Ebert's website wrote that he might be prejudiced on this one because of Ben Stiller's other efforts, and so he just really did not like Ben Stiller. I've had it a couple times when I've explained to friends, okay, this particular actor's in this film, but it's not that actor's film.
Yeah, and I agree with that. Like, I think I probably didn't necessarily want to watch this movie at first because it's a Ben Stiller movie, and
He also directed it.
Yes, he did. And I'm not a super Ben Stiller fan. I know some people are, and that's fine. But yeah, it's kind of like Will Ferrell. I don't particularly like Will Ferrell, except in Stranger Than Fiction. Stranger Than Fiction was an amazing movie.
It was a great film. And I always have to explain this. It's not a Will Ferrell film.
Right. And it was like this one. It was kind of quieter and a little slower moving. And I think people weren't expecting that. And I think that colors the reviews for sure.
Yeah, so it's not Gorby Zoolander.
No, and it didn't need to be. I think it's frustrating when people put actors into boxes. And again, I fall subject to this too, because I was like, oh, Ben Stiller. But then I'm so glad I watched this movie.
Yeah, it was so much better than I expected.
So I'm kind of at the end of my stuff. Do you have anything else you want to say before we do our final thoughts?
Let's see. I have a tiny, tiny bit of trivia. So in the short story, Walter Mitty is making up all these little words for this and that, but they're not made up words. And so the millionaire banker has this disease. I think they call it chorioposis. That's actually a plant. It looks a lot like a daisy. So that's just a little bit of trivia about the short story I thought was kind of cute.
Another little piece of trivia. In the movie, the last Life cover to be packed after Walter gets fired featured George Harrison of the Beatles. In the very next scene, a chalk mural can be seen that says, "Here Comes the Sun," which was written by Harrison. They just did all these cute little Easter eggy things.
Yeah. And this is a movie full of Easter eggs.
Mm-hmm. That was just one of my favorites.
Mitty does appear in the dictionary. A fictional character given to grand and elaborate fantasies, a daydreamer. Oh. So Mitty-esque. And I recommend seeing the earlier Danny Kaye version. It's really cute. It's a little bit hard to find. I wish older films had their own database. I found this on an untrustworthy website I'm not going to promote because I didn't even look at the website. I was just like, oh, there's the movie online. You could get it at the library.
Depending on your library.
It's available to be purchased off YouTube, I think.
Amazon. You can buy it on Amazon if you want to pay $10 for the DVD and have it arrive at your house.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate. I really like Danny Kaye. He was a very fun comedic actor of his day. So there is the older film that had a lot of these sort of updates. So this version of Walter Mitty is almost like a reimagining of the Danny Kaye film more than it is the short story.
The author,
James
Thurber, did not like the Danny Kaye movie, or the script that he read of it, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, so supposedly they talked to him quite a bit and never took any of his notes to change it. The director went with his own thing. Thurber wrote a letter saying he really didn't like it, although the director said, no, I got a letter that he did.
Yeah.
So, yeah, right.
So, there you go. Okay, so my final thoughts are as follows. It is a fine short story. It gives you enough to be interested. It doesn't bury you with info. You can draw your own conclusions. I think it does well in a short story. I personally like short stories that have an epiphany or something that sticks with you for a long time. This did not really have the epiphany, but you could definitely see that Walter Mitty sticks with you. Again, I'd forgotten his name, but I had read the story, and as soon as I started to read it, I remembered it. That idea of somebody who's living out a fantasy life when they're trapped in a not great realistic life is prescient, always, I think. So I would say, on the short story. It's fine. It's good. It will literally take you very, very little time to actually read it.
And it's free on the New Yorker website.
It is on the New Yorker website, so there you go. As for the film, it is not a perfect movie, but I feel like it does what it sets out to do, and it does it well. It is beautiful. The music, the camera work, everything is great. The acting is good. It leaves a nice taste in your brain when you're finished because it has a happy ending. It is definitely not a typical Ben Stiller movie, and I liked it, and I will probably want to own it now that I spent the money to rent it. And I'm like, yeah, I actually think that I could own this movie. And my 6.5-year-old caught a little bit of it and was intrigued. Although I will say she caught the part where he was riding his bike in Iceland or Greenland. I can't remember. Iceland. And he's riding and he crashes. And then he gets up and he's like, oh, the bike's busted. So he drops it on the side of the road and he just takes off. And my 6-year-old goes, he littered. That's not okay.
And Iceland is gorgeous. I would kind of be upset with that too.
Yeah.
Ella's right on.
Yeah.
I'd say the same thing. The short story is free. It's a very short, cute little story. It'll take you a couple minutes to read. I read it in elementary school and I remembered it just from that because I understood that sort of thing. So it's sometimes called a children's story written for adults. The movie is better than I expected. It is worthwhile. You may not want to own it, but I don't blame you if you do.
There you go.
All right.
Today's episode of Pages and Popcorn Podcast was brought to you by our patrons. So thank you very much, patrons. Woo! Yay, patrons. And if you would like to be a patron and get your own little woo shout out, you can do that at patreon.com/pages and popcorn podcast. Check out our Facebook page and our Twitter. We will be posting a poll. We will be posting this episode. We will be posting other things. And we have some potentially really exciting something that's going to happen on June 1st. So those of you who are not our patrons will get this episode on May 31st. Hopefully, but you're probably listening to it a little bit after that, probably mid-June. So go back and check it out. There will be a fun, exciting announcement, hopefully. Fingers crossed. And if there's not going to be, maybe I'll edit this part out and no one has to know. So that's it for now. Thank you.